are here collectively standing up and speaking out against violence that has been perpetrated far too long against our relatives.
May 5th is known as the National Day of Remembrance for missing and murdered Indigenous people across the United States and Canada. Across Turtle Island, Indigenous communities held events to honor the victims of the epidemic.
For missing murdered Indigenous relatives Peoples Day, it's for me it means a day to remember all the loved ones, all of our people that were murdered or missing, that a lot of us didn't get to say goodbye to. But our essential goal right now is just bring him home, physically bring him home so we can uh, have that closure.
In Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney called for justice for families of MMIP victims. And in the United States, the FBI also released new statistics which showed that over 9,000 American Indian and Alaska Native people were reported missing in 2025 alone. This is a slight decrease from the amount of missing people that were American Indian and Alaska Native the year before. In Wisconsin, community members gathered at the state capitol to call attention to the disproportionate rates of violence faced by American Indian and Alaska Native people. ICT's Erica Aisi was there.
Behind me here at the Capitol in Madison, Wisconsin, there's over 100 people here in unison getting ready to wrap the Capitol red in solidarity to bring awareness to the missing and murdered Indigenous community here in Wisconsin.
Event organizer Rachel Fernandez called for change at the steps of the Capitol.
We are here collectively standing up and speaking out against violence that has been perpetrated far too long against our relatives. It is not random. It is not isolated. It is the ongoing impacts of colonialism, systemic failures, and the devaluation of Indigenous lives.
Aisi sat down with Fernandez prior to the rally to discuss just how personal the movement was to her.
You mentioned your work as a community leader and organizer and advocate was based off of a lived experience. Mm-hmm. If you want to share briefly, what were some of those lived experiences for you?
It started out when I was a little girl. So I'm a child sexual assault survivor. From that, because back then I had no idea who to tell, what to say. I had no idea who perpetrated that violence against me. It was in the dark. So from then on, I tried to kill myself. I was bulimic. I was victim of domestic violence. And in my late 20s is when I was trafficked. And when I was trafficked, I was taken out of the state, across state lines, and I was gone for I don't even know how long. And I was basically missing, and nobody knew. Everybody thought that because of what I was dealing with at the time, that I was just off in Green Bay partying and doing whatever. They thought that's what I was doing, and even my friends in Green Bay didn't even know what was going on. And so when I made it back, I lived with that shame, that blame, because I was basically self-destructing, and that's how I was easily taken and trafficked. So it wasn't until my 40s that I was able to finally do some healing and release and say what happened to me. And the first person that I told was my husband. And after that, it became easier to say. After that, I started speaking and sharing my story, and it's become easier for me to cope with. And I do those things because it's important that our people know that it's okay to say, it's okay to heal, it's okay to not be silent. And this is like my heart work, my life's work. And it took me all those years to finally accept that this is what has happened to me, and I'm okay. And I'm okay to accept healing. I'm okay to accept love. I'm okay to accept forgiveness of myself. And so that really birthed the activist and the advocate in me to start organizing these events, start organizing gatherings, start organizing healing gatherings, start organizing woodland women, and provide a safe space for survivors and for families, because we don't get that. We don't get that anywhere. And I'm so appreciative for, the people like you, the people that are out there that want to amplify our voices and share our stories with care. That's what we need. Otherwise, we're doing it ourselves on social media. We're doing it, doing the Wrap the Capitol Red event. We're in our 5th year now, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger.
The week before National MMIP Remembrance Day, South Dakota saw its third convening of the state's annual MMIP conference, put on by the State Attorney General's Office. Participants celebrated the introduction of new federal legislation that could greatly impact cold cases in Indian country. The bill is named for a South Dakota infant killed 3 decades ago. It took over 30 years for the family of 23-month-old Kamisha Neivold to finally get answers in her death. Now, the Sisseton-Wahpeton Dakota girls family is using their experience to fight to make sure that no other missing and murdered Indigenous person's family has to jump through the same hoops they did in the pursuit of justice. The family would come to find out that there's a federal statute of limitations on second-degree murder charges for crimes committed on federal lands, something that they'd have to work around to get justice for Kamisha Neivold. Neivold's mother, Christine Irwin, and stepfather, Roger Irwin, spoke at the 2026 Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons Conference in South Dakota.
So we wanted to make sure that we took the time and the initiative to get those awarenesses out there to the public, especially in Indian country, because a lot of these laws apply to us. And so we're doing a spearhead to try to change some of these laws.
In June 2024, Jay Adams Jr. was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to Neivold's 1992 death. Prosecutors couldn't charge Adams with second-degree murder due to the 5-year statute of limitations on federal manslaughter charges, so instead they had to charge him with first-degree murder and offer a plea deal for the lesser charge.
So there was a lot of things going on all at one time, very quickly, hope, anger, resentment,
Hate, frustration, a lot of things.
It was just all, and it was.
I think the biggest was the trust.
Yeah.
Do we trust them to do their jobs correctly this time?
Certainly we would have liked him to get more time, but it was probably the best outcome.
That's Daniel Orr, a former Federal Bureau of Investigations agent who worked the case.
We could have charged that. We could have gone to trial. And we could have presented all our evidence. And he could have taken the stand and said, yeah, I did that. But I didn't plan it. It was an impulsive reaction. You've taken away the intent, and we might have lost it all.
First-degree murder charges hinge on intention or planning behind the actual homicide, whereas second-degree can be heat of the moment or even manslaughter, including involuntary manslaughter, which is accidental killing. A new bill named Kamisha's Law seeks to remove the statute of limitations on second-degree murder charges and is sponsored by Mike Rounds, a U.S. Senator from South Dakota, and Dusty Johnson, a U.S. Congressman from South Dakota, both a Republican. In a September 30th statement, Rounds said prosecution for murder should not have an expiration date. In the case of Jay Adams Jr., new evidence was not brought forward until over 3 decades after Kamisha was murdered. While he was prosecuted under a plea deal, this legislation rights a wrong by eliminating the statute of limitations for second-degree murder on federal land. This wouldn't be the first time that a federal statute of limitations on a crime was removed.
The laws have improved. There was a time when I came in, there was a statute of limitations for child sexual abuse. Well, victims of child sexual abuse or other crimes against children, you can't dictate when they're going to have the strength to come forward and disclose what happened to them. And they fixed that. Now there's no statute of limitations for child sexual abuse, aggravated sexual abuse, sexual contact. You've got any crime that involved killing a person should never have a statute of limitations associated with it.
Removing the statute of limitations could lead to justice for hundreds of missing and murdered Indigenous people across Indian country by allowing for investigators to charge individuals in these cases who may not have been able to be charged before.
I believe they need Kamisha's Law. They need to change that so that we don't have that statute of limitations, because we're dealing with missing. Some of these have been years, decades. What happens when we start to figure it out and the information comes in and we can build a case? We shouldn't lose truth and evidence and the opportunity to prosecute or hold somebody accountable because we've passed 5 years.
Outside of Indian country, this affects any murder investigation that centers on federal lands such as national parks.
It's about getting justice for the people that are getting killed.
Yeah.
Because they were killed on federal land. That's what it's all about. Wherever there's federal land, this applies. And we want to make sure that people that do these crimes are held accountable and can't get away with it.
The family is seeking support from all 575 federally recognized tribes. They're also hoping that more federal legislators will sign on before the legislative session ends in January.
We're not going to give up on this. It's just something that we're going to do the rest of our lives to help the communities.
For ICT, from Ocheti Shakoi Homelands, I'm Amelia Schaefer.
And so Johnson has signed on as co-sponsor.
It's never going to be over.
That's Wensley Nosey Sr. He's the founder of Apache Stronghold and has been one of the leading figures attempting to protect the sacred Apache site known as Oak Flat, where a planned copper mining operation has so far been given the go-ahead and even received a land transfer.
We go back to the beginning of time. You know, there's a lot of, like within the Bible, what it talks about, how the flood and so forth. Well, it's the same thing with us. You know, we talk more about how we were in the earth when the flood came and how we came back on top of the earth when the flood had settled. And that's in our religious, in our religious ways of belief, because our oldest sunrise ceremony is still used because of how we were taught by the Creator. You know, and it's still a part of our life of when the spirits came into the earth to bring us back to the surface of the earth. And that's the sunrise ceremony where the girl comes back to the top and sees that the water has settled. And then the spirits tells us it's time to come back on top of the earth.
The effort to protect the sacred site has been going on for numerous years through litigation and appeals, attempting to stop the land exchange that includes Oak Flat to Resolution Copper. Resolution Copper is a mining company owned by Rio Tinto and BHP, both based in Australia. If the copper mine were to be constructed and operated, it would create a crater 2 miles wide and more than 1,000 feet deep.
And the bottom line is we're right, you know, to protect the water, to protect the oxygen, the air, to protect the way the climate moves, the weather moves, to protect the unborn, that these people are making decisions for the unborn, and to love all what God created, you know, is right.
Earlier this year, the Supreme Court denied to hear Apache Stronghold's appeal, allowing for the land exchange between the U.S. government and Resolution Copper for construction of a copper mine to proceed.
It's not over. It's never going to be over, because what they have done is they have opened the can of worms. And they just messed with the wrong tribe and the wrong person.
According to a press release from Beckett, who was part of Apache Stronghold's council, the land exchange was, quote, as illegal as it was brazen. Noisy Senior and Apache Stronghold are now back in the district courts seeking to reverse the transfer.
The federal judges are reviewing the whole package, and they will render a decision. And if they render a decision, that decision will be that, one, no, we're not going to hear it, or two, that we are going to hear this case. You know, and so if the case is going to be heard, then you're going to see, again, here in Arizona, the United States and Resolution Copper understand, being questioned all the things that we have been mentioning over the years.
The suit Apache Stronghold filed against the federal government argues that the land transfer of Oak Flat to Resolution Copper would violate the religious rights of the Apache. Nosy Sr. says the environmental impacts of the proposed mine are just as important to keep in mind.
First of all, which is the number one, right along the side of religion, is the gallons of water that's going to be contaminated and contaminated, and as well as destroyed, as well as, you know, recycled elsewhere. And so that alone, you know, when there is no water, what does that mean? That means that's going to affect as far as what the study shows, the aquifers, that's going to affect all livelihood around us. Talking about cities and towns, you're talking about animals, you're talking about, you know, plants, you're talking about the climate changes, because if you're familiar with Oak Flats, you have an abundance of rain that comes through, you have snow. So now that the center part, the highest peak, is going to be contaminated, that means every tributary that comes off the Pinal Mountains is going to be contaminated. And then on top of that, you're talking about, you know, contaminated water to no longer be used. And the way the environment works is that when you're sucking good groundwater out, that means the plants that have their roots into the earth and the soil is going to be more dry. So you're going to see even more of a desert on top of where it's at right now, you know, how it is right now. Mm-hmm. So you're talking a massive impact that's going to happen. That's crazy, you know, that I think, you know, this is where I was always hoping that the Arizona people would really get directly involved, because once the Southwest is affected in that way, it's going to affect everybody down the road. And as far as like, because Resolution Copper got exemption from all the laws, that means they don't have to put anything out there about where things are going to go. But if you look at the report, you know, even here in South Mountain in Phoenix, they're talking about some of the slur being sent here. They're talking about some of the water that's being contaminated and refilters and come down to Marana, Arizona, towards Tucson, towards Phoenix, all the farm fields. And then you talk about the tributaries that are going to be contaminated. And so it's not only from what's underneath the earth, but it's also what they will burn that becomes airborne. And so it's going to be a vast contamination that's going to happen, disaster that's going to happen in the Southwest. And that's what this state of Arizona is going to face. So it's a massive disaster that's coming.
For ICT, Daniel Herrera Carvajal.
Drilling near Peshla, a sacred site in the Black Hills, has stopped following a temporary restraining order from U.S. District Judge Camila C. Feeler. This is a partial victory for the Naino-Chetishakoi tribes that have sued the U.S. Forest Service, along with a separate lawsuit by Indian Collective, Black Hills Clean Water Association, and Earthworks. Both lawsuits are against the U.S. Forest Service in response to it granting a permit for exploratory graphite drilling just 0.6 miles north of Peshla, which is a sacred site and part of the Lakota people's creation story. The restraining order expires in 2 weeks when another hearing is set for May 20th at the federal courthouse. For over a week, a group of treated offenders has occupied the drill site, and they're standing in opposition to the project. They're standing in prayer. So what's the issue? A permit was given to a company, Pete Lean & Sons, to do exploratory graphite drilling to identify if graphite is present in the area. Graphite itself is becoming something that U.S.-based companies want. I was told last year by a mining expert that All of the United States' graphite comes from China, and as we know, China has been subject to numerous tariffs by the United States this past year, which means that local companies are looking for cheaper, local solutions to this problem because graphite is an essential component in the creation of lithium batteries, which are used for things like EVs or even computers. So the drilling project is aimed at identifying graphite at the site. Peshla is part of the Lakota people's creation story. Lakota people have gathered at the site for thousands of years and don't plan on stopping. They gather there for ceremony, and there's a small bison herd in the area. Now, the mining project advocates and treaty defenders are worried could disrupt hundreds of cultural artifacts that are there, archaeological sites, and the ceremonies that go on throughout the year at Peshla. The issue is still developing. For ICT, from Oceti-Sakowee Homelands, I'm Amelia Schaefer.
I'm joined now by Crystal Echohawk from Indigenous House, a digital platform and creative studio exploring Indigenous issues in today's modern media landscape. Welcome, Crystal.
Thank you, Stuart.
Crystal, you have some interesting new stuff going on. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we're just excited as we've launched into 2026 to fully launch Indigenous House as the evolution of Illuminative. And it's something that's really built on so many lessons learned from Illuminatives, very successful, 7+ years working in Indian country. Illuminative was set up to be a racial and social justice organization that was really advocating for the visibility of Native peoples. We're no longer an advocacy organization. We are doing it by being a content studio and a distributor as well. And so, Indigenous House is a multi-platform digital content studio, and we really look to make a really significant impact in reaching, hopefully tens of millions of eyeballs.
Okay, but you also talk about raising the visibility of Indigenous peoples. Tell me about how Indigenous House is an evolution from Illuminative's work in raising that visibility.
Well, I think it's really looking at the way that the media landscape has changed, and that, for example, YouTube is now the largest streamer in the world. It surpasses Netflix, Amazon, Disney, you name it, right, in terms of being the largest streamer in the world. So we are really looking at the digital first space as a way to say we're not going to deal with the gatekeepers anymore that exist within legacy media and traditional, Hollywood TV and film. And we are going to really make that pathway for content, great storytelling, and distribution through these own multiple platforms that we have in YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, and beyond.
Okay, now you mentioned YouTube. You've got a new initiative with a new YouTube show.
We are, we're funding and investing in a lot of different shows. So one of the first shows that we invested in was by Mark Trahant, a really innovative show called Breaking History, which I love because Mark often explores just, facets of history that we don't understand that had such a big impact on Native peoples. We also have launched another show earlier this year called Jaded, that was a podcast hosted by Jade Begay, that really, I think for Jade, who is a multi-hyphenate, organizer, advocate for climate change, she's a creative and impact storyteller. Like so many of us, is really exploring this notion of what it's like to feel jaded right now, because so much has changed, and so many of the norms and values and things that I think a lot of us held dear, particularly within the progressive movement, have really been challenged. And I'm also excited that my new podcast, Power in Numbers,
what's happening right now. Everything feels like it's breaking. The economy, politics, reality.
And that really looks at some of the research that we did in our final year of Illuminative last year before we sunsetted the organization. And it was an exciting round of research because we got a lot of input from different diverse leaders and organizations across Indian country. I think we surveyed over 5,000 non-natives on a variety of different issues that not only related to what they think about Native people, but I think we need to move beyond just representation research that we used to do at Illuminative, where we're just constantly focused on what do people only think about our community. I think now we're really looking at where do we build bridges with other constituencies in the United States. And so Power Numbers really looks at how we're bringing together diverse constituencies to kind of find where do we find more commonality than we do difference. And so that is a real important evolution from Illuminative.
But this isn't just some boring research podcast. Because here's the thing, we are the numbers.
We have within our grasp the ability to change everything.
We're going to continue.
In everything that you just mentioned about what you want Indigenous House to be, that the spreading of Indigenous values and the centering of Indigenous values is perhaps a super important message.
It truly is. And I think when we think about Indigenous values, which are, about our families, our communities, our cultural lifeways, our relationship to the land and the world around us, and that relationality, values that are held by many tribes, like, as the Lakota value, we are all related. But Indigenous values are not totally foreign and alien and different from a lot of people's values, right? And I think it's just time that we began to see each other as human beings and really figuring out where we can align more if we're gonna really salvage democracy or make sure that there's a planet that's gonna be here for many generations to come.
Crystal, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.